Organized money.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that more people can get exposed to organized money. Really appreciate it. So, one of the things that it's an important part of the news for a lot of reasons, and it really is kind of a constitutional crisis. But we're going to talk about the business model of big law, right? Fancy corporate lawyers who advise big corporations and make a lot of money doing it. They are now under attack by Donald Trump. But to understand how Donald Trump is attacking them and why he's attacking them and what these lawyers are doing in response, you have to understand how they make money.
And how much money they make. Apparently, there was this great quote. It was in the New York Times last year. And this legal recruiter, they're like headhunters that recruit elite lawyers for these big law firms, said $20 million is the new $10 million. And apparently 10 law firms have spent $20 million a year or more to lure the biggest, most high-profile lawyers to their firms. And this is like NBA free agency, and the numbers are almost as big as kind of a sports free agency market.
Right. So this is a significant change, as we're going to get into, in the legal marketplace, right? To have, lawyers be lured to new firms with a 20, 25, $30 million bonus package or something like that. It's not totally new. This is a quote from that I found in the 1980s. It was an anonymous banker who said that for $500,000, you could buy any legal opinion you wanted from any law firm in New York. So it's a long time coming, but it's gotten really extreme over the last, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, these law firms have gotten more powerful. They're bigger. They are more integrated with politics than ever before. And, so when Donald Trump ends up going after a series of Democratic aligned big law firms like Paul Weiss and Wilmer Hale and Perkins Coie, he's really going after the Democratic Party in a lot of ways. That's kind of the evil genius of this, is that the Democratic Party is just a bunch of law firms now.
Yeah, so to give you a sense, Paul Weiss, which is the one that he went after with an executive order, and then they cut a deal with him, has 2 Obama cabinet members as partners. That's Jed Johnson and Loretta Lynch. He was the head of the Department of Homeland Security. She was the Attorney General.
Right. And the Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, used to work at Paul Weiss. And the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, his brother, works at Paul Weiss. So you have almost the entire top level of the Democratic Party integrated with this law firm that is, very much, and we'll talk about this in the show, but their reaction to being attacked by Donald Trump was, hey, let's make a deal.
And so I'll just add one other thing, which I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor, 3 female Democratic Supreme Court justices, they were all summer associates at Paul Weiss. Right. So this is a big deal. Like, Donald Trump is breaking the machine, and it's a bad machine, right? He's doing bad things, but it's a bad machine. We have a guest to walk us through this world of big law, to talk about how they make money and why they make choices and the politics of it.
And guess where he used to work? Paul Weiss. His name, but he's one of the good guys. His name is Jonathan Kanter. He was formerly the Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department, where he successfully sued Google, where he sued Apple, where he sued United Health, where he sued Ticketmaster, all kinds of powerful firms. Each one of those firms is represented by a big law firm. In many cases, it was Paul Weiss on the other side of the table. And he has just a great amount of insight into this entire kind of shadowy world that really holds the strings for the Democratic Party.
So Jonathan, there's a couple of reasons why he's a really good person to walk us through this world. One of them is he's been a partner at 2 big law firms. So Paul Weiss was actually his second partnership. And then he also when he was at he founded a boutique antitrust firm that was kind of going up against big law firms. And when he was at the Antitrust Division, he went up against big law firms as well. So he's seen it from all sides, and has a kind of very insidery perspective.
Here we go. It's organized money.
So thanks, Jonathan, for being here. We really appreciate it.
I'm delighted to be here. I listen to every episode. I love the show, and it's an honor to be on.
Oh, well,
First time caller, long time listener. All
That's right. First time, long time.
Well, you, as we'll get into, you don't have anything else to do.
No, I am blissfully unemployed.
Okay, so we are excited to talk to you about many things, including your work in the Antitrust Division, but also as our sort of guide to the business of big law, right? So you were a partner at the firm, a big law firm, Paul Weiss, and then at the Antitrust Division, your division faced off against Paul Weiss in many cases. And now Paul Weiss and actually the whole world of big law is mired in a sort of crisis, which we'll get to. But before going to Donald Trump's attacks on these firms and their response, we want to understand the business model and culture of big law, because there's often a lot of conversations about law firms and lawyers, but it's a business too, right? So we want to talk to you, not just in the context of policy and what you've done, but also in the context of you as a business person.
Yep.
So you have a unique career, and why don't you tell us about it? So you started at the Federal Trade Commission after law school, right?
Sure. I did both my summers during law school at the Federal Trade Commission. And then after I graduated, I started as a staff attorney at the Federal Trade Commission, ironically working on oil mergers. And so ExxonMobil, BP, Amoco, Arco. And then I also did media mergers like AOL, Time Warner, and Time Warner EMI, a deal that we ended up, I think, pushing to the brink and getting abandoned.
So this was like the late 90s.
Late 90s. So I started at the FTC in 1998.
Okay.
With a full head of hair.
And eventually you go into, private practice in the world of big law. And it's curious, how do you think about the business of law? There are many sort of understandings of lawyers in that they aren't just business people, but they're officers of the court. But they have this dual kind of purpose, and I'm wondering how you think about that.
Yeah, it's complicated, but I think to understand law and law firms, or big law in particular, I think it's important to kind of recognize that big law as it exists today is not how big law existed, 75 years ago. And there really has been an evolution and a ton of change in the last really 20 years. So if you go back 75 years, big law firms, or 50 years even, big law firms really resembled more of a tenured faculty at a university. So you'd have these firms, people would come up, they'd spend 8 years training, and the people, usually men who are successful, would get promoted to partner, and you become a full equity partner, meaning you get a share of the profits. Each year in seniority, as you go up, they call it lockstep. You get more points, a greater share of the profits. And then if the firm made money, you'd make money. And that was basically what you do for your entire career. And most people who became a partner at a law firm really would never leave. There weren't a lot of free agents, or what we call laterals. That was rare. And there was a clubbiness. There was a sense of belonging, an institutional identity that big law firms cultivated. And they all had their own personality. They were stuffy places. There were a lot of arrogance. They were very profitable, but not like they are today, right? And so people who are at big law firms would be wealthy, but they wouldn't be like rich, right? It would be very, very well-to-do by most standards, but not the kind of investment banker style money that people make today. Things changed about 30 or so years ago when corporate practices and litigation practices started recruiting laterals. And that meant that people would leave a law firm in order to get more money somewhere else. And in the process of doing that, which is fine, it just changed the cultural nature of a law firm, right? It didn't have the same continuity. People, if they left for money, would stay for money or leave again for money. And we started seeing, not unlike free agency in sports, we started seeing a lot more movement among law firms, and they became far more profit driven. And profit started going up, and um, compensation structure started changing.
So let's start with kind of the basics of big law. Okay, so the lower, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the lowest rung on the totem pole is associate, and then I guess we'll intern, but like when you join, you're an associate, and then sometimes senior associate, counsel, et cetera, all the way up to partner, which is an owner of the firm. You've been an associate at a big law firm, then a partner at two of them. So what is the job of an associate, and what is the job of a partner? And yeah, just kind of walk through that,
Right.
I guess today in your experience.
Associates work really hard. They make very good money. They don't get a share of the profits, but basically you are at the beck and call of the partners of the law firm. And the more you work, the more money the partners make, right? Because associates bill based on time. And so you might charge now upwards of $1,000 an hour for an associate, a junior associate. And every hour they work means more profit for the firm. And so the partner's job is to generate business to make the associates work hard. Now, it's not that it's not just about it's not just about churning work, right? That makes the firm more money. But the associates are the ones who are writing the memos, writing the initial drafts of the briefs, doing the legal research, helping with all sorts of different things, doing the due diligence on a merger, for example.
But they're also being taught. I mean, you learn, like you're being mentored I'm giving you the idealized version, but like you come in as an associate, you don't know anything, right? And then the partners teach you, right?
Yes, usually the journey starts as a summer associate. So during law school, you'll go work at a law firm. And if you're good, you'll get an offer to come back after graduation. And then you'll start your journey toward partnership, which used to be an 8-year journey. Now it's much longer. And during that period, you'll grow or you'll leave.
So what you said about laterals there is just really interesting, because in general, I mean, we kind of like worker mobility and worker liberty to go where they can achieve their greatest success. But I think what you're saying is this had an impact on how the firm saw itself and where it wanted to, where it needed to go in terms of creating revenue, so it could attract those laterals. Is that kind of the what you're saying?
That's absolutely right. And I'm not necessarily casting judgment on the idea of people moving. I think worker mobility is a good thing. And law firms are, ironically, one area where you can't have non-competes.
Right.
And so
they're
lawyers
banned
can't,
by the ABA, right?
correct. And so yes, it is a good thing, and it allows markets to work. And so if someone's willing to pay you more, you can leave and go elsewhere. My guess the point is that culturally that never used to happen, because people would feel attached to a law firm not just because of the money, but they felt like they were part of an institution with a personality, and you'd have your partner lunches, and this is where your social life was, and your the spouses would all know each other, and it was very clubby, like a country club with legal briefs.
And not to overstate it, also it was harder to lateral because it wasn't like there wasn't a market, right? The other law firms weren't hiring either, I'm assuming, since they were rare. But I guess to sort of a different question, big law is not the only, there's a lot of lawyers in this country, and a very small percentage of them are in what we would call big law. So what makes big law big law? What's different about big law than, there's no like little law, but like plaintiffs firms, which are kind of like the ambulance chasers that have a sort of sense of grubbiness or something like, I like plaintiff's lawyers. I generally don't like big law people, but generally there's a perception that big law is more prestigious or whatever. So what makes big law big law?
Some of my closest friends are plaintiffs' lawyers. And so I think, there's really a continuum. So you might have your, general neighborhood commercial lawyer, somebody who might work on real estate transactions or contracts. And then you'll have your regional lawyers and law firms. And these are people these might be Midwestern law firms that will serve companies that are in the Midwest. And so you'll have firms like Jones Day that grew up in Ohio. And the reason it grew up in Ohio is because that used to be a hub of business. Or firms like Bryan Cave in St. Louis, which grew up because St. Louis used to be a business hub. And I think as you had businesses dispersed across the country, you had law firms that would grow up in order to service those businesses. And so when you think about big law as a category, it's usually corporate-oriented law firms that are designed to service, whether it's litigation or corporate work. Their clients are primarily corporations. It used to be regional in nature. And then you had the New York law firms who were considered the Wall Street firms who would work for banks and media companies based in New York. Over time, as the middle hollowed out in the country, you saw a lot of consolidation among law firms, a lot of law firm mergers, and a lot of law firms effectively go under, and folks would consolidate. And so when people think of big law firms, they're usually thinking of full service law firms that have corporate practice, a litigation practice, an environmental practice, a labor practice, an employment practice, all the different pieces so that a corporate client can go to one firm for all its needs.
And this gets into sort of what this crisis is all about. And we'll get there in a second. But what's interesting is that when Donald Trump talks about some of these firms, he's talking about far left firms. And in fact, there was this one comment that he sought the advice of a firm that's largely associated with the right, Sullivan and Cromwell, to ask, what should I do about Paul Weiss? So these firms sort of over time seem to have taken up different parts of the partisan spectrum in ways that are kind of interesting. How do you understand that?
Yeah, so law firms, a lot of the partners, because they tend to have a lot of money, and because they tend to deal with matters that involve the government, typically are, not all of them, but many of them are politically active. And so they have an interest in politics. And so a lot of major politicians come from the law, and many of them have been at law firms. You can, look at the Senate. You can trace even a bunch of those senators back to major law firms. It's not uncommon. And law firms.
Hakeem Jeffries comes from Paul Weiss.
Yeah,
right?
Kristen
Schumer's
Gillibrand.
brother
Yeah.
works at Paul Weiss.
Schumer's brothers at Paul Weiss.
Yeah, and Kristen Gillibrand was at Davis Polk. I mean, you can kind of look at people across Congress on both sides of the aisle, and I think Republicans, not surprisingly, Texas law firms tend to skew more Republican, and New York law firms tend to skew more Democrat. I think that's just a function of geography and environment. New York law firms tend to be the most profitable, tend to be the most formidable, and tend to be the most successful and probably envied in the industry. And so if people are looking for the best law firm in the country, there are great law firms everywhere, but you usually think of the New York law firms, right? It became a hub for excellence in terms of profitability and performance in the law industry. And because New York tends to skew left of center, it is not surprising that a lot of the partners at those firms tend to skew left of center.
So and we're going to get into why Donald Trump targeted certain law firms and why some law firms resisted and why some didn't. But before we get there, do some firms specialize more in trial work, in deal work, I don't know, what are the different lines of business that a major corporate law firm would engage in?
Yeah. So the major law firms, typically you can divide them up between litigation and corporate. And in each of those silos, you have lots of different practices. So litigation might be commercial antitrust litigation. It might mean intellectual property litigation.
So you're going litigation, just to be clear, you're going to trial, right?
You're going to court.
You're
Right?
going to argue for a judge. It's like eat what you kill. You got to be good at arguing. Right?
Exactly.
Right,
like
okay.
this is controversy.
Right.
You're suing someone, you're defending someone being sued. You're preparing for lawsuits, you're
Right.
guarding against lawsuits. You might be defending a lawsuit against the government or government
Right.
investigation.
But it's skill based, not relationship based, is the point, right?
Well, that's not necessarily true, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
your clients are relationship based, first
Right.
of all, and if you are defending an investigation, a government investigation, clients will hire the firms that have good relationships or former government employees.
Okay. Well, that just throws a wrench into my thinking. I don't like that. But the other side is corporate law. Those are deal oriented.
The corporate side are typically deal oriented, the most notable being mergers and acquisitions, but it could be capital markets and finance. It could be private equity, hedge funds, the whole thing. Now, you have other practices that don't neatly fit in both categories. You might have a bankruptcy practice, for example, that might, be in a different area. You might have private clients, which used to be popular in the big law firms to kind of help the really, really rich people, but that's become rare. More often than not, the big law firms really are focused on the major corporations as their primary clients.
So you mentioned that a lot of politicians come from the world of big law. I think a lot of judges also come from the world of big law, but there's also a sense in which the lawyers who stay behind are almost kind of like a shadow government, and they members of Congress defer to the opinions of these big lawyers. Law firms can write legal opinions. Can you talk about sort of the important sort of legal credibility of these firms and their role sort of in this whole ecosystem?
Yeah. So, there used to be a saying that, no one ever got fired for hiring IBM or GE or whatever it might be. And I think there are a handful of law firms that have the same kind of reputation. And so if you're a big company and you need a legal opinion, whether I can do something or not, whether I can structure my transaction this way, or how you might be dealing with stock or other kinds of trading, you go to a big law firm and they give you an opinion. Now, their sense is that law firms are these pure as a driven snow, neutral actors, but somebody is paying for that opinion. They're often paying a lot of money. And I think over time, while I would like to think and hope that most lawyers will give the honest legal opinion, which, I think still happens quite a bit, there is a sense that you need to be quote unquote commercial. And so in the legal industry, being quote unquote commercial means helping businesses achieve their intended results. And so if you have a lawyer at a big law firm who always says no, doesn't help clients figure out ways to solve problems, or is seen as being obstructive in terms of business objectives.
Or just says you have to follow the law. You can't do that thing you want to do.
Right. Clients don't like that.
Okay. Because I don't want to be like, well, they're not creative. They don't try to problem solve. That's one way to put it. But I've seen a lot of presentations from lawyers being like, here's how to get your merger through, even if it's not necessarily, here's how to destroy documents in a legal way, like stuff that's kind of on the borderline. But I guess we want to get to what Trump did, but I want to get to one more point here, which is, these law firms, we talked a little bit about this. The lawyers in these law firms often staff the administration that's, the next administration. And so the Democrats have their big law firms. And when a Republican is running the government, then they sit in their law firms and they help corporate clients. But when the next Democrat comes in, those lawyers try to come into government and run the administration. And often, you can have it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just a thing that happens. And then on the other side, that happens as well. So there's a kind of like, it's not a shadow government exactly, but there is this. It's not just that they have an interest in politics. It's not just that they deal with the law. They are a fundamental part of both political parties. Is that a fair characterization?
Absolutely. But I think that really changed when firms started hiring laterals. So it used to be that if you were a partner at a law firm, usually a partner for life, and it was quite rare for someone to leave the law firm and go work for the government, and then go back out to another law firm, right? You kind of had government people and you had law firm people, and yeah, there was some commingling, but it was more of an exception. Then law firms understood that they could be more marketable to their clients if they hire people coming out of government, and that really kind of gave birth to the revolving door, which picked up over time.
So
yeah, so let's get into it. So Trump has put out these executive orders targeting Paul Rice, targeting Jenner and Block, Wilmer Hale, Cummington Burling, Perkins Coie. I think he was going to do one against Skadden Arps, but they made a deal in advance. How do you understand what Trump is trying to do here? I think it's related to a little bit to what you were just talking about with the revolving door, because all of these firms did some government work at some point that Trump obviously disfavored.
So my interpretation of what's happening is it's intimidation, right? So law firms are being, they will the purpose of a law firm, among other things, one purpose is to defend clients against government overreach. And so to the extent that the administration wants to overreach, people who feel like they are wronged are likely to hire law firms to defend them or to attack that overreach. That is dangerous as an institution to a government that wants to have command and control over society. And so when you think about the institutions that have put a command and control style government at great risk, it's law firms, it's universities, it's courts. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is kind of a systematic attack on on those institutions that serve as a check on government power and overreach. The stated reason for going after these law firms is really in two categories. One, DEI, and two, that people from those law firms were associated with the prosecution or investigation of the president. And so at least when I look at the list of firms now, what it really feels like is this is a way of saying, if you let your people go into the government and go after me, I'm going to hold you accountable.
So it's sort of a chilling effect, like attack on, okay, so, and that's like tin pot dictator stuff, right? To go after lawyers.
Yeah, I mean, like it goes to the fundamental. I mean, the whole purpose of lawyers is to represent people against government overreach. And if lawyers are afraid to represent people to fight government overreach, then who's going to do it? And it will make it easier to overreach.
I think there's another part of this too, though. I think there have been something like 65 or 70 cases against Trump administration priorities that he has engaged in the first couple months of this new term. And if you're putting out a bunch of executive orders against law firms and intimidating law firms, who's going to matriculate, like who's going to pursue those cases? It's going to be a different class of lawyer and maybe a lesser class of lawyer if these are the biggest firms that have the most experience with dealing with courts, including all the way on up to the Supreme Court. I mean, isn't that part of it too?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like saying, okay, I'm going to start with the elite law firms and the elite academic institutions and the places where you might have the most advanced thinking and that might be the most formidable opponents to the administration's agenda. You essentially intimidate them so that they stand down on doing things that might antagonize the administration.
Okay, I'm just going to call a little bit of a timeout here because we've been talking as if this prestige like does actually translate into intelligence and competence. And I just want to point out that big law, there's a lot of laziness and shitty thinking and bad lawyering in big law. And generally I like plaintiffs' lawyers in antitrust because it's really hard. And if you are in the business, it means you're a really good lawyer because bad lawyers don't last very long when they're trying to do antitrust stuff in the courts from a plaintiff side. Whereas big law, you attach yourself to Google, they spend more on, catering budgets than they do, than most of the nonprofits in DC. They'll put you on retainer just to make sure you don't work for anyone else. So like, I don't want to overstate how amazing these guys are.
Well, no, I think
But I
that's
think
that is
true.
fair. That's absolutely fair, and I'm happy to walk you through. I mean, we beat big law all the time at the government. We were better lawyers than a lot of the big law firms that we had that we faced.
I mean, I've been on panels with some of these people. I'm a fake lawyer. I'm not even a lawyer, and I don't know. I don't want to be like I beat them in the panel, but like they're not like amazing, right?
There wasn't scoring in the panel.
Yes,
Matt,
although Matt, you have a
understand.
lawyer shirt, but not lawyer headphones.
That's fair.
Yeah, and so, but the perception, right, from the administration, right, and Donald Trump, for example, is familiar with New York law firms. He grew up in New York. He understands which firms have a reputation for prestige, whether that reputation is earned or not, fair or not. There is a sense that there are a handful of institutions that are elite. If those institutions are afraid to represent clients taking on the government or defending themselves against the government, then at least the perception from the administration is that that's a way to increase their level of control and power.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think also this sort of intertwining between these elite law firms and the elite levels of the Democratic Party make it more along the lines of what we've seen a lot of Republican administrations do over history. Let's go after labor. Let's go after the media. Let's go after these sort of seats of power of the opposition party. And I think the sort of, uncanny genius that Trump has had here is that he sees that the Democratic Party and these elite law firms, there isn't a whole lot of daylight between them.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, again, going back to kind of the New York centric and San Francisco centric nature of a lot of these major law firms, to be sure, there are a lot of major law firms that originate out of Chicago and Texas and other places as well. But New York and San Francisco tend to be the hubs of big law. And if you're at those firms, right, chances are you have a strong tradition of being very politically active as a law firm. If you're at those law firms today, chances are you are avoiding politics and avoiding, for example, contributing or hosting fundraisers or being seen as close to the Democratic Party because you don't want to engender bad will from the administration.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so what we saw kind of quickly and immediately is Paul Weiss and Skadden Arps both tried to cut a deal with Trump and were successful in doing that. And is that just sort of a preservation instinct? I mean, I wonder how you see that as someone who worked at Paul Weiss.
No, I was very disappointed. I think law firms are supposed to, again, represent clients against government overreach. And I think it sends a bad message, to put it charitably, when a law firm is not willing to defend itself against government overreach. Those executive orders are not likely to hold up even with the current composition of the Supreme Court. It's only a matter of time until they are declared unconstitutional. I think most lawyers, regardless of where you're on the political continuum, will tell you that they're not, on sound legal footing. And I think that was clear to any law firm that is dealing with the administration. I think it was, largely fueled on the sense that law firms need to be seen as, or some law firms want to be seen as cozy or in good standing with the administration so that they can get good deals for their clients. And that perception was more of a concern than the actual legal risk.
Well, right, I mean, I noticed that Paul Weiss, Scott Barchet is out in the New York Times talking about how they cut this deal with Trump. And then this week, less noticed, Scott Barchet is on the press release of how Paul Weiss is helping Rocket Mortgage buy Mr. Cooper and creating one of the biggest mortgage servicing firms. I mean, I think it is the biggest mortgage servicing firm in the country at this point. So, it's to me, I mean, it's very clear what some people are getting out of this, but is there something about Paul Weiss and Skadden, who both caved to Trump? Is there something about their business model that got them to do that? Because I know, is Paul Weiss more of a deal company? Is Skadden more of a deal company? Are they more litigation shops? Like, what's their business model?
So firms like Skadden and Paul Weiss, I think today are full service law firms that tend to skew more transactional. They are more corporate in nature. And so they want those deals. They want the referrals from the bankers. They want the perception of being seen as someone you can call in any administration and have your corporate fixer on speed dial. That's different from the litigation firms and, Jenner and Perkins Coie and some of the other firms. Wilmer tend to be more litigation oriented firms, as do the firms representing them, like Williams and Connolly, which is a litigation boutique and one that's considered, a group of strong litigators based in Washington, D.C., who is actually suing the Trump administration. And so I do think there is a breakdown between the corporate oriented law firms and litigation oriented law firms.
That's interesting. And one of the things that both the firms that ended up making a deal offered was pro bono work. Yeah, I don't know if it was entirely pro bono work to Trump necessarily, but it was toward causes that I guess he would seem to support. How do you read that? I mean, pro bono work is obviously something that is done in a lot of these firms, but I guess the question is, why was that immediately something that could be offered?
Also, what is pro bono work?
So pro bono work is offering free legal services to people who are in need. And interesting, a lot of pro bono work is immigration. And so
I don't think that's the work that he wants these firms to do.
Exactly. It's going to have a chilling effect on the willingness of these law firms to represent people seeking asylum or people who are being deported or whatever it might be. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to have a real chilling effect on immigration. And I think it's going to have a chilling effect on doing pro bono work on behalf of institutions, whether they're nonprofits or individuals who feel like they are being, wronged by the admin.
So I'm very skeptical of pro bono work in general. I think that one of the things that pro bono work does for these firms is it lets them kind of push back on government power in general in what looks like an innocent area or a very nice liberal area, but then they use that to push back on government power in addressing white collar violations and things like that.
In that sense, it's kind of like a microcosm of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is in many ways, I guess it is the Democratic Party. I think that's sort of part of the thesis of what we go on. It is the sort of kind of the brains behind it. But one of the things that a lot of these firms did that I think Trump hated is the 2017 to 2020 quote unquote resistance, right? Which was very socially oriented, not corporate oriented. And then a lot of the investigations in the early 2020s, which, like it or not, right, they came out of these big law practices and often was pro bono work or people leaving these law firms to go into an area of government and doing something, either a congressional investigation or some sort of litigation against Trump. And that resistance, that he hated that stuff, but also that stuff's not really happening now. It's much more like these firms are silent. And so the opposition to Trump is coming in a very different way because these firms don't really have they're not really directing it. I mean, that's kind of more of a comment than a question. But I guess that's my observation is they were the
But Matt, I have a question for you then on that. Do you personally see that as a sturdier and maybe more sustainable type of
Oh,
resistance?
I love this. I think it's awesome what's happening. These firms are really having they have to choose between money and integrity, and they've been playing this game where they go into government, they come out of government, make a shitload of money, and they do a terrible job when they're in government, helping they have a view of certain view of the corporate world. You're an exception, Jonathan, even though you came from Paul Weiss and then you went into government. Although you didn't come directly with Paul Weiss, but I think it's a racket and I think it's really bad. And so for them to be put on the spot and then actually have to have real stakes in the game, and you really see a split. And it's nice to see it. I think, this is a story. I love this story, but Karen Dunn, I was there during the Google ad tech case, which we're going to get into, that you, I think, helped bring. There's an antitrust case against Google for controlling the certain advertising technology markets. In the same day that Karen Dunn, who was a partner at Paul Weiss, she gave the opening, terrible job.
Opening statement.
Gave the opening statement for Google. She then went up to wherever Kamala Harris was preparing for her debate to help her prepare for her debate with Trump, which was on the same day. And the Judge Brinkema, in the case, actually made a joke when she was excusing Karen Dunn early from this case, because being like, I know you have to get to wherever you need to go, help Kamala. And so it was like, that's insane. To me, that is insane. And so I love seeing these firms having the choice put to them and being like, yeah, we're going to pick the money. We want the money, because it just blows up this whole political framework that I think is really toxic.
Listen, law firms are for-profit businesses, right? And so they're, whether they don't have public, because law firms in this country can't be public, but they have shareholders, and their shareholders are the partners, and the partners believe, more so than perhaps even in the past, that their sole objective is to maximize share value, meaning make as much money as possible to distribute to the partners. And so, yeah, that's their business. And I think
that's not fair. But that's not fair, because there's a lot of law firms that don't approach things that way. You see even some of the big law firms are fighting Trump, even though they probably would make more money if they didn't. I don't think that's a fair. I don't think just sort of giving it to the shareholder maximization theory. Like, no, these are people who are making decisions to give up their integrity for money.
No, my point's slightly different, Matt, which is I don't think we should look at law firms as the beacon of what's socially acceptable and the saviors of society. Right. They're for-profit businesses that are representing companies who pay them, and that's what they do. And to the extent that we care about policy and politics and government overreach, it may not be that big law firms are going to save us.
Well, and let me just.
Well, that's certainly true. But I think it's actually interesting that there are
wait.
different.
Dave, can I just argue with him for one more, and then you can make your point?
Please.
I guess I will say I think that is unfair to law firms, because to say, we shouldn't look to law firms to be saviors. Well, of course not, right? I mean, we shouldn't look to anyone to be saviors, but I do think that some of the lawyers who are put on the spot are actually showing that they are trustworthy. And I'm not just talking about big law or whatever. I'm just saying, like, I do think that this is a very revealing moment. And I think it shows the kinds of people that you can trust to work with integrity, and the kinds of people you can't trust to work for integrity. And everybody's in the same for-profit model of law firms, but I think people are making different choices.
Well, no, I think it's important to distinguish this moment and this issue from others, right? I think this issue, in terms of putting an executive order that says law firms' clients are going to be banned from government contracts and lawyers can't go into government buildings because the president doesn't like who they are representing, that strikes at the foundation of the profession, and it strikes at the foundation of our society, which is rule of law is the difference between the United States and other countries, right? It's not the fact that we have a constitution. It's the fact that we have a legal system that enforces the Constitution. And if you start attacking those institutions, whether they're law firms, judges, or whomever else, our whole system breaks down. And I do think you're right in that this is a moment where people need to stand up for the rule of law. And standing up for the rule of law means lawyers saying, you can't tell me, government, who I represent and who I don't represent. You can't
Yeah.
tell me, government, that you're going to destroy my business if I pick a client that you believe is unpopular or inconsistent with your ideology.
Yeah, it's a very what did you do in the war, daddy kind of moment. And some people are saying, well, I made a deal that was good for the firm. That's what they did during the
Right.
war.
What I was trying to do is explain earlier that I think, in order to understand why law firms make the decisions they make, it's important to recognize that they are businesses and they are going to make
100%.
decisions in their best interest. And therefore, they may not, in most instances, be there to simply look out for the best interests of society. They're there to look out for the best interest of their clients and their bottom line. This moment, however, I do agree is different because it's going to the heart of not just the profession, it's going to the heart of our society.
So that was great. And I think what's so interesting about your perspective on this, Matt, is that you clearly see this as a very McCarthyite, a very chilling kind of way to attack political and just legal opponents. But you also actually see some hope in what is happening to big law right now. And I want you to explain that.
Right. So Donald Trump, this is tin pot dictator stuff going after the lawyers, but also I hate the lawyers, right? Like not all of them, but but all of them. No, I mean you and I have both been threatened by lawyers, right? For doing, very reasonable, lawful stuff. And these guys are paid by powerful interests to just be bullies. And they run the Democratic Party. I mean, Karen Dunn was, we talked about her. She was going to be the White House counsel under Kamala Harris, right? And
and she almost was going to be the head of the Antitrust Division under
Biden.
Joe Biden. She was up for that position. There were people from Paul Weiss who were, in making the hiring decisions in the Biden administration and the Obama administration.
Biden put 3 Skadden alums on circuit courts, which is the level just below the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is that this is a system, right? And the system is we go and do nice things for poor people in pro bono work. Karen Dunn, by the way, next month is getting an award for her lifetime of dedication to helping underserved communities and standing for the rule of law. She's actually getting an award for that from DC Legal Aid, right? And it's amazing, right? And they really believe that, right? Like this system of we're good guys because we work for corporations, but then we do the pro bono stuff and we stand for the rule of law. Let us run your Democratic administration, you grubby politicians. And that moral authority is really important. And it is gone. And I think that is so great because it's going to force a real reckoning in the Democratic establishment. And it's going to force us to find a different approach. And you can already sort of see it. Like we can't, the chill means that when members of Congress, when people are under attack, they don't go to big law for help. They're finding other ways of approaching the problem, and the message that's coming out incoherent, not always great, but it's like much more populist because it doesn't have the grubby little hands of these big law suave guys on it.
Right. I mean, I think what's interesting about it is it forces us to look at these people as individuals making individual choices rather than as members of this sort of elite ruling society.
Right.
So when Paul Weiss cuts the deal, immediately it's like the mask has slipped.
Right.
You guys are just transactional. You don't really have any integrity whatsoever. And we're not going to listen to you anymore. And when other firms like Jenner and Block decide to fight this and fight it successfully because they've actually won at least preliminary injunctions against this activity, then we see you as, oh, you know what? You work for a law firm or whatever, but you've actually stood up when it was time to stand up, and you have more integrity because of that, and maybe you have more authority because of that. But it's not because of the nameplate. It's because of what you did.
Right. I mean, you're willing to risk something, right? Jenner and Block is under really serious business risk because its clients are like, we don't want to upset the Trump administration. So some of them they're probably losing clients right now. Paul Weiss, they make just profits, not revenue, but profits, $7.5 million per partner in it per year. That was last year. And they had enough resources to stand up to Trump, but they decided not to. And they decided not to because they liked the money. And I think that's, you're seeing other people are willing to say, look, we are willing to pay a cost for this, take a risk. And, it's not like they're someone who is getting thrown into an El Salvadorian prison. It's not that kind of risk. But if you're not willing to risk, just a few $1 million off of your $7.5 million annual,
not getting the second yacht, you're risking not getting the second yacht.
Your yacht's yacht.
A yacht, 4-year yacht.
Jeff Bezos' yacht actually has a yacht. I'm not kidding.
Right. Anyway. So we had so much to talk about with Jonathan Kanter that we're actually going to split this into a second episode. So next week, we're going to talk more about Jonathan Kanter's career at the Antitrust Division and what he did to take on these big law guys and how he really changed the course of history in terms of what that division now represents and what it does. And so that's going to be next week. We hope you come back for it for another episode of Organized Money.
Organized Money.